Hi, and welcome to episode 37 of the Trending Tech podcast on securing cellular IoT. And it's a very warm welcome to our thousands of listeners globally, wherever we find you today. My name's Jeremy Cowan. I'm co-founder of the telecoms and tech sites IoT-now.com, vanillaplus.com, and the EE.ai, which, as the name suggests, covers artificial intelligence for the evolving enterprise. Thanks for joining us for today's sometimes serious, sometimes light-hearted look at digital transformation for enterprises. Okay, if you've spent any time at all lately studying the Internet of Things, you'll have heard that the chances of an IoT security breach are growing all the time, and so is the cost. Why is this happening? Well, as a new report backed by global security experts Thales and written by UK-based Beecham Research says, IoT solutions are becoming increasingly important to business operations. So inevitably, there are solutions that are becoming larger, more business critical, far-reaching, they're interoperable, and they're more complex. And today, we're talking about cellular IoT security with an expert from Thales and one of the authors of the report. Thales is a global technology provider with more than 77,000 employees worldwide. It works to deliver digital innovations in big data, AI, connectivity, cybersecurity, and quantum technology. And I'm proud to say Thales are our sponsors today. So thank you to them for enabling this really critical discussion. Our first guest is Stephane Quetglas, who is Marketing Director at Thales Digital Identity and Security. Stephane, welcome.
Thank you, Jeremy. It's great to be here.
Good to have you. Also joining us today, it's a pleasure, as always, to hear from Robin Duke-Woolley, CEO and founder of the international consultancy Beecham Research. Robin, good to have you here again.
Great to be here, Jeremy.
Now, the tech sector is a big place, so we like to scan the sky with our guests to see what else is going on. Guys, let's take a quick look at a couple of serious tech news stories that you've found, and later we'll take a break in our light-hearted closing section, What the Tech, to discuss a couple of technology news stories that either amused or amazed us. Coming to you, Robin, what serious tech news have you seen lately?
Well, I was quite alarmed myself, actually, to read about medical IoT devices carrying the biggest security risks. So this is a report on ZDNet on the 19th of April. And the report says connected medical devices still operate on unsupported operating systems and remain unpatched, even as cyber attacks continue to grow in the highly targeted healthcare sector. So they took the example of nurse calling systems, which allow patients to communicate with nurses should they require assistance. And they monitor. So then it reports that 48% of nurse call systems have unpatched common vulnerability exposures, what they call CVEs. So that's just over a third. Then critical severity CVEs. That's a lot when you start thinking about how many nurses there are around. And then they talk about infusion pumps. Now that's a really worrying thing because they're used to mechanically or electrically provide fluids to patients. And they're the second highest, riskiest IoT medical devices, with almost a third operating with unpatched CVEs, and then 27% with critical severity CVEs. So that's a huge number.
Yeah.
And then over half of IP cameras in clinical environments have unpatched CVEs, of which 56% critical severity. So you start to wonder, how safe am I going to a GP's surgery these days?
These are mind-blowing figures, Robin. Stephane, what did you think of this?
I think that's really annoying, worrying, scaring, like Robin said. But it's probably because it is in the healthcare space that we react this way. But it's also the same situation exists in other sectors, which is a real global problem, I think, that we are touching upon right now. Yes. So that means that there's a need for change when it comes to connected a device, whatever it is. And I think we're going to talk about that more during this podcast, of course. And that's a real issue.
Stephane, which serious tech news story caught your eye?
It's a similar one, but in a different sector, by the way. It's a report that we found on the website telecoms.com. So a cybersecurity firm produced a report on the state of cybersecurity. So they took a very large sample of data. They say they've been using artificial intelligence to achieve that. They're talking about 1.8 billion connected devices, 40 million home networks analyzed, which is absolutely massive, probably the biggest analysis ever made. And the findings are that the cybersecurity threats are truly coming from the boom in IoT products and IoT products that you can have in your home. That means, for instance, an IP camera. And these IP cameras are very, very, very exposed. You can find also connected DVRs, for instance, or connected storage devices that have been pointed out. And when they look at the reasons, the problems behind cybersecurity threats, they see three of them. So the first is about adware spreading in these devices. So that's one thing. The other one, which is very important in my view, is that, like Robin said, a very large number of devices are end of life, unsupported, basically in one word, outdated, actually. Because when you buy an IP camera, probably the new model will be released by the manufacturer 1 year or 2 years after. And the one you've just bought is okay at the time you purchase it, but later on will not be supported anymore. So that means you find yourself with a product that has increasing level of risk a long time. It increases until you decide to replace it with a new one. So probably you will use it for many years and years longer that I would say that exceed the lifespan of the support provided by the vendor. And that's a real problem.
Yeah.
So being able to know when you are an end user what to buy in terms of connected product for IoT products for your home, for instance, is important. You need to know how long is the support. You need to know if the support will be conducted in a proper manner. So that's a challenge, I think, for both the end users, the consumers, and the IoT companies as well.
Robin, what did you take away from this story?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty important point because we always talk about security in business and the need for high levels of security in business. We talk less about security for consumers, but the threat is increasing all the time. And I think that this whole issue about what security level you are prepared to accept is something that really should concern everybody actually in the future because it's all increasing. The threat is increasing all the time. And that's not just in business, but it's in the consumer space as well. We've always assumed that the consumer space is pretty insignificant, that, you know, if you get a threat, then what does it mean? But actually, it could be very damaging. And I think that we'll be covering some of that in what we discussed today.
Well, this was on telecoms.com. And as always, our listeners will know that we put links to all of these stories into our transcript. So you can all follow this up there. Thank you. Well, look, let's have a closer look at what we were saying earlier. This is a big, big issue in IoT cellular security. Stephane, there is broad agreement, I think it's fair to say, in the IoT sector that the risk of users experiencing a major security breach in their IoT solutions is growing. Why is it growing?
So I think that to start with, it's fair to say that IoT is being deployed at a larger scale. We see connected devices in many, many different contexts now. We just spoke about healthcare, but also IP cameras, home. There are many other use cases that are actually tackled with the IoT, with connected devices. So that's the first reason. This broad number of vertical applications is also comprised some critical ones. If you think about managing healthcare data, but also the smart grid, for instance, monitoring water distribution is also very critical. This critical mass that we are reaching becomes attractive because the gains that can be achieved by attackers increases at the same pace. And since the IoT is being deployed at a larger scale, also what we call the attack surface is increasing. There are more endpoints, devices that you can potentially target. So they're more available to you if you want to attack a system. So at the same time, I think it's also a fact that digital security is evolving pretty fast and that the new entrants, new companies wanting to connect the devices in the market are facing the challenge of understanding how to protect what they launch, what the solutions they launch on the market, but also how to acquire the necessary skills to do so, to protect them properly. And I think more importantly, also to maintain these skills because of the evolution of digital security. So that this trend of growing IoT deployment is actually clearly coming with a higher risk of security breach in these solutions.
Robin, in your report, which we've referenced already and which is going to be published on IoT-now.com, you talk about the increasing cost of a security breach. How do you actually go about measuring the cost of a security breach, and what sort of costs are we talking about?
Yeah, I think we're talking about businesses here. We're not talking about consumers. We'll talk about consumers later. But there are really three areas that we need to worry about. First of all, if there is a breach, there's likely to be an impact on the operations to start with. So, for example, if it's in a factory, it might stop the factory for a while. Well, in that case, there is the downtime of that and the impact of that. And that can be very high, depending on obviously what the operations are. But perhaps more than that, there is the potential reputational cost. So a well-known brand, for example, if it becomes clear that there is a security breach for a well-known brand, that can be pretty devastating because what's happened to that data and where has it gone and who's using it and for what? So there's the whole potential litigation associated with that, let alone the straight, reputational damage of that. Then the third area is the cost of repair. So if something is attacked and it's remote, and it can't be fixed remotely, you might have to go out to the site wherever it is and replace the equipment that was there as well. So, all in all, you can have like three areas that are in themselves potentially quite large. So if you add them all together, it can become a huge cost. And that's the problem, that as we get more into potential security breaches, they become more sophisticated. As the systems become more sophisticated, so do the security breaches, which means that the potential for cost becomes increasingly high. And it's then a question of, can you afford to sustain a security breach? And that's really where we got to. Because sooner or later, probably sooner, there will be a security breach.
It's inevitable. Stephane, I understand Thales and others in the industry have been working really closely with the GSMA, this is the mobile network operators, to develop an IoT security framework. Can you give us an overall picture of what this framework looks like?
Yes, of course. So GSMA worked with stakeholders of the industry, including us, on several important elements to help make the cellular IoT solution secure at a mobile network operator. So we're talking about cellular, and it is made of several elements. So the first one, I think the foundation probably is the eSIM, the embedded SIM, which is to be found in more and more devices to secure the connectivity of the device to the mobile network. And this foundation is based on secure hardware and software. It is certified under the ESS scheme, which is the EU-ICC Security Assurance Scheme, the second element of this framework, let's say, which consists in defining clearly what you want to protect and using an industry acknowledged methodology to verify that this protection is at the expected level. The other elements managed by GSMA are accreditation of manufacturing sites. So you make sure that the products are manufactured properly and that the security of the sensitive credentials in these products are properly managed. So these are called SAES guidelines. And finally, it's more at a big application level. We worked also with GSMA on solutions for the protection of data, the authentication of the devices when it comes to protecting the link between an IoT device and the application in the cloud. So this is called IoT Safe. And there's another element to conclude, which is called Secured Applications for Mobile, or SAM, which allows to deploy security features of applications in the eSIM instead of the device itself. So all of these elements can be combined to increase the security of IoT solutions. So be they for consumer IoT or for enterprises that want to deploy IoT solutions.
Yeah, that's a lot, isn't it? You talked about secure hardware and software, Stephane. Is it necessary to have both, or can you do everything in secure software?
So actually, if you want a high level of security that is required for connecting to a mobile security network using an eSIM, for instance, then you cannot rely just on software. You can implement some protections in software, but they are not enough. So the ideal combination to reach the level that is expected, for instance, by mobile network operators with an eSIM is to combine secure hardware and software. And this is only the way you combine these two together that can lead you to the expected level of protection. Obviously, some people try to use only software. It's really something that needs to be put in perspective with the use case that you want to protect. And as the research suggests, when we looked at the news previously, if you consider IP cameras, that's clearly not enough. So it's really about thinking about the use case you have and the level of security you need to achieve to protect the connectivity of the device, the privacy of the data, for instance, that will lead you to this solution at certain level of security. And as far as IoT is concerned, connection to mobile networks, exchange of data, of sensitive data, for instance, from a smart meter to the remote management solution of the grid, it is very important to have this combination of secured hardware and software.
Stephane, you mentioned ESA certification. What's the significance of that, please?
So ESA stands for EUICC Security Assurance. So EUICC is the technical acronym for eSIM. And ESA certification is a very important change in the GSMA framework because it has been introduced recently. And it consists in reusing an industry acknowledged approach to security evaluation, which is called common criteria, which is internationally recognized, actually, with a very clear definition of the security target that you want to protect. And this approach is done using third parties. It's not only the manufacturer of the device, of the eSIM in this case, that will, claim that the eSIM implementation is good enough. It is something that is done with a security lab, so laboratories specialized in digital security who are going to analyze the product, analyze the eSIM, and provide a report saying, okay, this product is compliant with the protection of the security or the sensitive credentials that it is supposed to manage. And this independence, the third-party approach is very important. So these laboratories are endorsed by the GSMA. They have no link whatsoever with the product vendors. And they are also providing the report to a certification authority that will actually verify the data and provide the final certificate. So that's the way to achieve this independent evaluation that GSMA defined. And we believe it's very, very important to do this certification this way, because that's how you can prove to your customers, to the stakeholders in the marketing, that your products are trustful and can be used without any security issue.
Robin, I want to come back to you, if I may. Should all devices be covered by this kind of security? Isn't that expensive?
Well, yes, not necessarily. It's expensive for who? So for the consumer, going back to what we were talking about earlier about hacks for consumers, you may not want to pay extra for a highly secure device. But if you do, you'll probably it'll probably only cost you a few more pence or something like that. So what level of security is important to you as an individual? But expensive for who? Really, if you are like a consumer and your device gets hacked, it may not be important to you, but it might well be important to the manufacturer of that device, because then we get into all of those costs that we were talking about earlier, the reputational cost in particular in this case, and then the cost of repair, even for a consumer device. So yeah, it's not trivial. And you have to balance the risk versus the cost. You might pay a little bit more, but then you might have a lot more protection. So I think that's a personal decision. And I think that needs to be changed over time as well, because as we were saying earlier, the risks are getting higher over time and they're becoming more sophisticated. So you may not be concerned about your headset being hacked at the moment, but you may be concerned about your baby alarm being hacked. And you've got to weigh that up. as to just how important that is. And then you may want to be a little bit more careful about the protection that you get for that. And certainly manufacturers will, once they get hit with a product that has reached the headlines, they're going to be worried about that happening again.
So it's all about managing appropriate protection.
Yeah.
Stephane, following on from our earlier talk about IoT Safe, what does that add to what we've just discussed?
So IoT Safe is relevant for the application level, meaning that it is a standardized solution that leverages the eSIM to provide security to the communication between the IoT device and its application in the cloud. So it provides ways to identify the device, to authenticate the device, to encrypt the communication, to sign transactions, for instance. So that's a very useful functionality or set of functionality available to IoT device makers so they can add simply proper security in their devices. IoT Safe leverages the eSIM, so that means it leverages, let's say, a secure platform that is proven in terms of security. We talked about certification earlier. It is also typically a product, an eSIM is typically a product that is delivered by a digital security specialist like Thales. So you can truly benefit from products that have been designed for, let's say, security, with the security in mind, for security purposes. And it's also a way to solve the deployment of a large number of devices, let's say hundreds, thousands, millions of devices, because with IoT Safe and the additional provisioning solutions that you can combine with IoT Safe, you can automatically generate the security keys, let's say, that are going to be at the core, at the heart, at the device authentication, communication, protection, inside the eSIM directly, which means it's done internally in this cryptographic toolbox, if you wish. The keys are never shared externally, so they are very, very well protected here. And it doesn't have to take place when the device is manufactured, meaning in the device, in the OEM, there will be no impact due to the addition of these security features, which is also important because we talked about the cost just before. Keeping security simple and cost-effective is the ideal situation because you can add security easily in your device. It doesn't add up a lot to your bill of materials, but also when you manufacture your device, you don't have to spend a long time injecting these security credentials inside in a secure manner. You don't have to have your factory audited for security and so on and so forth. So it makes both security useful because it is at the right level and also cost-effective.
Yeah, that's great. It's quite a growing framework, actually, of additional services that the GSMA has been putting into this. You mentioned another set of initials, and so just to confuse everybody, SAM, another set. Could you say what the significance of that is, too?
Yes, sure. So SAM is important because it also brings a way to secure applications and services in an effective manner. I was just talking about the IoT communication with IoT Safe, for instance, but with SAM, you can go further because actually it's like IoT Safe, it's a way to leverage the eSIM secure capabilities to split the security, let's say, processes of an application running in a device and have them being executed inside the eSIM. And the non-secure part of the application software can stay in the device. So that's a way to achieve it. And it's also a great way to implement IoT Safe and to decouple IoT Safe, which is for the IoT service, from the IoT communication over cellular. So that means for an IoT enterprise, you can think about your IoT cellular communication separately from the way you secure the communication between the IoT device and your application. If you need to change your connectivity partner for some reason, you can do it using the eSIM remote SIM provisioning capabilities without disrupting the communication between your device and the cloud. You don't have to re-enroll the device, for instance.
Right.
So that's a great addition to IoT Safe, actually.
Good.
That's really helpful. The EU passed its Cybersecurity Act in June 29. Stephane, where does that fit in with all this?
So it's an important milestone in the EU. I mean, regulation is probably the proper way to increase security in the IoT, to provide the guidelines, but also obligations to companies who want to deploy connected devices. I think the goal is the same as the one we've discussed until now. We need to protect what is connected because it can be hacked potentially, and the cost can be very high. Damages can be very high. It's not finished, but what we can say that this regulation is aiming at improving the security of connected products at the design and development stages. So it's all about security by design, for instance, not taking security as an afterthought, but really at the beginning of the development of the product cycle, let's say. So they're talking about certification, but they're also talking about maintenance. Remember the cases that we shared before about outdated products that are exposed to cybersecurity attacks. They recognize that the maintenance is essential because security is evolving. So you need to make sure that your devices will remain at the required level. And speaking about levels, they also recognize that there's a need to have different levels, which will differ per vertical application. So they're working about that. So it's a way to, I would say, formalize the best practices that we see on the market, actually. And it's also a way to have them applied in a broader manner.
Great. Stephane, if we can close this section just by looking ahead, where do you see future threats arising and what are you doing to address these?
So maybe just reinforce this message again. So the first threat, future threat in the near future, I would say, would be not implementing the best practices that we already know. And that's a clear problem. And it's too often security best practices are not implemented and not considered by IoT enterprises. Not all of them, of course, but there are still too many of them that are not involved in digital security. And I think in terms of technologies, what is going to change a lot, also the digital security world that we know as of today is post-quantum cryptography, which is a game changer, probably more mid-long term, because it's going to disrupt some of the well-established systems that we know. We need to change the cryptographic tools that we're using so they can resist to post-quantum. So the attacks, quantum computers that start to be, at least in laboratories now, working pretty well. So this is where we need the expertise of digital security specialists, so they will be able to tell where the existing system need to evolve by combining the existing solution with new approaches that will defeat these quantum computers. And that's probably something that we will see emerging in some years from now. We don't know. Nobody knows exactly when, but that's a clear threat that we have started addressing already.
Thank you. Thank you both. I think there are some incredibly valuable lessons in there, which we would all do well to listen to. Okay, let's unwind for a moment and see what in the world of tech has amazed or amused us lately. Stephane, your turn to go first this time. What have you seen?
Yeah, an amusing one about Tesla. It's both amusing and a little bit annoying as well. Because, Tesla cars, they have cameras in the front and the side of the cars everywhere, basically. And there are also cameras inside the car, actually. And this news that I saw, this special report from Reuters, it was beginning of April, I think. So this report is talking about private recordings done by these cameras in Tesla cars, shared employees at Tesla. And some of these clips have actually circulated, which is a privacy issue, a strong privacy issue, of course. But what caught my attention here, and that makes this news amusing to me, is that actually one video showed that it was a Tesla that was parked inside a garage, and near the Tesla, visible on the camera, was this submersible vehicle from the James Bond movie. You remember this Lotus that was this white sports car that could transform itself into a submarine. And it was actually a real submarine that was built for this movie in the 70s. And we know who owns this car, actually. And you know what? This is Elon Musk, actually. So he bought the car a few years ago, and probably somebody shared videos of Elon Musk's garage with this vehicle.
Great.
Doesn't sound like a good career move for somebody. The submarine goes by the amazing name of Wet Nellie.
Yes, Wet Nellie.
Terrific. Yeah. Okay.
Robin, what's making you smile in the tech space lately?
Well, you could consider this to be somewhat alarming, actually. So it was only out a day or so ago. This is the US Supreme Court refused to hear a case arguing that AI algorithms should be recognized and protected by law as inventors on patent filings. So the guy that was putting this in, a computer scientist, he claimed that his program, his software, came up with the idea of a fractal food container and a unique pattern for an emergency light beacon, and he wanted to patent it. But he wanted it to be patented in the name of his AI program. And the Supreme Court and the Patent Office reckoned he couldn't do that because it wasn't a natural person. It was a machine, and therefore he couldn't do it. But the thing is that that's amusing in the first sort of degree, but then you start to think, well, where's it all stop? Where are we going to get to the point where people's AI is treated as a person instead of as a machine? And I thought that was quite concerning, actually. So I read this as a bit of a joke, and then I thought, hang on here, there's a serious point here.
Yeah, there is. I have to confess, I was a bit confused by that. Help me if you can. So the US Supreme Court won't hear the case because the AI program can't be listed as an inventor. Perhaps that's a fair point. But it either means AI creations can't be legally protected in the US, which I guess is bad, or it means that AI inventions can only be protected if they're registered in the name of a human. And
maybe that's just as bad.
I don't know whether this is bad news or good news.
Yeah, I think we got coaching horses through the law here somewhere. So yeah, it could be interesting. Yeah. So we're in for an interesting time. And it was a nice diversion away from the depths of security to see something that is occupying people's minds that may seem quite trivial.
We're indebted again to the story which was on the Register, and we'll put the link into our transcript so that anyone can follow that up. Please let us know what you think on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever you've just invented. You'll mostly find me on LinkedIn at Jeremy Cowan, that's Cowan, or on Twitter at JCIoTNow. Anyway, just before we go, let me say a big thank you first to Stephane Quetglas of Thales. It's been great to have you with us, Stephane.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jeremy. It was a great pleasure for me to be here. And if you want to reach me, I'm available on LinkedIn, Stephane Quetglas at Thales, or my email is stephane.quetglas@thalesgroup.com if you want to exchange with me.
Brilliant. And our thanks also to Robin Duke-Woolley of Beecham Research. We really appreciate it, Robin.
That's great. It's really good to be here, Jeremy. And anybody can contact me on LinkedIn, or it's probably easier at info@beechamresearch.com rather than spelling out my whole name. So yeah, that's great.
Thank you. And our thanks to Thales, today's sponsors. We really value your support for these discussions, Stephane.
Thank you very much.
Now, don't forget, everyone, you can subscribe to the Trending Tech podcast wherever you found us today. So a shout out to our fantastic audience. There's thousands of you worldwide now. We're delighted to have you following us, and please keep it up. Meanwhile, please feel free to give us a good review at podcasts.apple.com/digital-transformation. Honestly, that's a bit of a mouthful. We'll have to find another way around that. It boosts our status in the rankings, of course, as you guessed. And it's not just to give us a warm glow, but it helps new listeners to find us too. In the meantime, please keep checking IoT-now.com, vanillaplus.com, and the EE.ai, because there you're going to find more tech news, plus videos, top-level interviews, and event reviews, plus a whole lot more. And join us again soon for another Trending Tech podcast looking at enterprise digital transformations. Bye for now.